Title: Human accepts an alien slave as payment, only to discover she's a wealthy princess. HFY, Sci-Fi. In the year 2385, humanity had stretched its reach beyond the stars. Colonies dotted distant planets, and intergalactic trade was booming. But with that came the darker sides of progress: slave trades, criminal syndicates, and corrupted corporations. Out on the fringe of the galaxy, humanity was far from the law's watchful eye, and Captain Nolan Greaves, a former military officer turned freelance trader, made his living on the edge. Greaves' ship, the Red Horizon, was a rusted, battered vessel that had seen better days. Its hull was scarred from countless skirmishes and pirated raids, but it still ran. Nolan, a practical man with a cynical view of the universe, had no illusions about the morality of his work. If it meant getting paid, he'd transport anything, legal or not. So, when he was offered a peculiar payment for a risky smuggling job, a slave, he didn't bat an eye. The deal had been simple enough: deliver a small cargo to a remote mining colony on Rigel 6, a backwater planet in the Outer Rim, in exchange for a hefty fee or something of equal value from the local merchant. Nolan had assumed that something of equal value would be credits, or perhaps some rare tech salvaged from the planet. But when he arrived to collect his payment, he found a different kind of commodity waiting for him. The woman was tall and striking, with long silver hair that shimmered like starlight under the dim lighting of the merchant's quarters. Her eyes, a piercing shade of violet, held an intelligence that far surpassed the dull, docile look most slaves wore. She wore a simple, tattered outfit, but even through the dirt and grime, her presence commanded attention. Her skin was a pale shade of blue, a common trait among the Andorian species, but her bearing, her aura, told a different story. "You are the one who accepts the deal?" she asked, her voice regal and commanding. Nolan raised an eyebrow. "I'm here for payment. I'm assuming you're it." "I am," she replied simply. He gestured toward his ship. "Then let's get you settled in." She didn't resist. If anything, there was an air of resignation about her, as if this arrangement was part of a greater plan. Nolan had seen enough to recognize the signs of someone in a desperate situation, but there was something about her that didn't add up. As they journeyed toward the Red Horizon, Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a deal that might come back to haunt him. The woman, her name, he learned, was Lissa, spent most of the trip in her quarters, offering little conversation. It wasn't until they neared the edge of the system, and Nolan's ship was intercepted by a sleek, imposing craft, that the truth began to surface. The ship's commander, a tall, stern-faced Andorian man, hailed the Red Horizon with an icy calm. "Captain Greaves, we request the immediate release of Princess Lissa. She is not your property." Nolan blinked. "Princess? The hell are you talking about?" The commander's eyes narrowed. "Princess Lissa, heir to the throne of the Andorian Empire. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Nolan felt the blood drain from his face. "Wait, this is a joke, right? I picked her up from a slaver market. She was stolen from us." "You fool!" The commander's voice was full of anger. His fists clenched. "She has been held in servitude for years, but no more. Release her at once." Lissa emerged from the ship, her expression calm and poised despite the chaos around her. She stepped forward, her regal bearing undeniable even in the simplest attire. "Captain Greaves," she said, her voice soft but filled with power, "I thank you for your service, but it seems my presence here is no longer necessary." Nolan was stunned. "Wait, you're really a princess? I thought you were just another slave." Lissa gave a wry smile, the corners of her lips twitching. "I was once, but a princess is more than a title, it's an inheritance. And I've inherited more than just a throne." As the crew of the Andorian vessel boarded the Red Horizon to take her, Nolan couldn't help but feel a little out of his depth. He had spent years navigating the murky world of interstellar trade, but this was something else entirely. He watched as Lissa walked up the ramp to her ship, her gaze locking onto his for a moment. "You're a resourceful man, Captain Greaves. Perhaps our paths will cross again." He swallowed hard, still trying to wrap his head around what had just happened. "Yeah, maybe." With that, the Andorian ship turned and disappeared into the vastness of space, leaving Nolan standing on the bridge of the Red Horizon, bewildered and, if he was being honest, slightly humbled. He had just been a pawn in a game far bigger than he could have ever imagined. But as he sat back in his chair, staring at the stars, a thought crossed his mind. Humanity may not be the dominant force in the galaxy anymore, but we sure as hell had a knack for making waves. And Nolan Greaves had made one hell of a wave. The end. Title: Human accepts an alien slave as payment, only to discover she's a wealthy princess. HFY, Sci-Fi, continued. Captain Nolan Greaves spent the next few weeks haunted by the encounter with Lissa. Despite the chaos, he couldn't help but think about how a simple smuggling job had unraveled in such an unexpected way. The Andorian Empire, a power Nolan had heard whispers about but never directly dealt with, was vast and ancient. If they had the resources to send an entire warship to retrieve one princess, what else were they capable of? He had to admit he'd gotten lucky, too lucky. Weeks turned into months, and the Red Horizon glided through space on its usual erratic course, running smaller jobs and staying out of the bigger galactic conflicts. But Nolan had begun to wonder if that peace was about to change. One day, while docked at a neutral space station to refuel, Nolan received an encrypted message. It was from an untraceable source, one that had taken serious effort to breach the usual galactic firewalls. His curiosity piqued. He decoded it quickly. It was short and simple. Captain Greaves, your life is about to change. Meet us at the coordinates provided. Come alone. You owe me. The message was signed with a single symbol, a silver crescent moon overlaid with a star. It was unmistakable. It was the emblem of the Andorian royal family. Nolan cursed under his breath. It had been months since he had dropped off Lissa, and he had assumed their paths would never cross again. She had promised him that their next meeting would be on her terms, and Nolan couldn't help but wonder what kind of terms she had in mind. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this felt different. Yet, a strange, almost magnetic pull in the back of his mind told him that he had no choice but to go. He had played his part in something much bigger than himself, and now it seemed like the universe was calling him in again. Nolan set the course for the coordinates. When Nolan arrived at the desolate moon orbiting the gas giant Zythar 9, he was greeted by an eerie silence. His ship touched down on the barren surface, and the comm system buzzed with a familiar voice. Captain Greaves, I see you've arrived, said Lissa, her voice warm but laced with authority. Nolan stepped out of the Red Horizon and onto the cracked, rocky terrain. A sleek shuttle waited nearby, its engines glowing with a soft blue hue, and there, standing in front of it, was Lissa. Her appearance was striking, far more refined than the tattered slave she had once been. She wore an intricate gown made of a fabric Nolan could only assume was woven from a rare alien material. The violet of her eyes seemed more pronounced against her regal attire, and she stood taller, more confident. She was a princess, not just in title, but in presence. You've changed, Nolan remarked, trying to hide the awe in his voice. Lissa smiled, but it wasn't the same as before. It was a smile of someone who had learned to mask her true intentions. I had to. I've spent years trapped in the shadows of others, but no longer. Now, I lead. She motioned for him to follow, and they boarded the shuttle. As they ascended into the darkened sky, the stars seemed to stretch and bend around them, as though they were leaving the ordinary world behind. What's going on, Lissa? Nolan asked, his voice thick with suspicion. What do you want from me? Lissa's gaze softened for a moment. I don't want anything from you, Nolan. You've already given me something precious, your trust. But now, I need your help. Help? Nolan raised an eyebrow. With what? She turned to face him fully, her expression serious. The Andorian Empire is on the brink of a civil war. My family is divided, and I am caught in the middle. There are those who want to use my position to control the throne, to turn the Empire into a military dictatorship. But I refuse to let that happen. Nolan was silent for a long moment. And you want me to help you stop it? Not just stop it, Lissa replied, her tone unwavering. I want to restore balance. I want to bring peace to the galaxy, but I cannot do it alone. I need someone who understands how to operate in the shadows, who can navigate the lawless corners of space where power and politics don't reach. Nolan crossed his arms. You know, I'm just a trader. I'm not some revolutionary. Lissa smirked. You're more than you give yourself credit for, Captain. You've been on both sides of the law. You've seen how the powerful exploit the weak, and now, you're the only one I trust to help me. He sighed, rubbing his temple. This was too big, too dangerous, but at the same time, it was clear that Lissa wasn't asking for a simple favor. She was offering something far more enticing, an opportunity to change the course of history. "And what's in it for me?" Nolan asked, finally giving in to his curiosity. She leaned forward, her eyes meeting his with a sharp intensity. "You want your place in this galaxy, Captain. You want to stop drifting from job to job. You want to make a name for yourself. Help me, and I'll give you the power to do just that. But more than that, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you've fought for something that matters." Nolan felt a flicker of something deep within him, an unfamiliar sense of purpose. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "I'm in, but I'm not doing this for free." Lissa smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As the shuttle hurtled toward the heart of the Andorian Empire, Nolan realized something. He had thought that his life would always be defined by survival, by scraping together enough credits to get by. But now, it was clear that the universe had bigger plans for him, and for Lissa. Together, they would fight to reshape the galaxy, and Nolan Greaves would never again be just a pawn in a game he didn't understand. He would be part of something much greater. The end, for now. Title: Human accepts an alien slave as payment, only to discover she's a wealthy princess. HFY, Sci-Fi, continued. The weeks that followed were a blur. Nolan had expected espionage, intrigue, and maybe a few covert operations. But what he hadn't anticipated was the sheer scale of the war Lissa had been thrust into. The Andorian Empire, a vast coalition of worlds and species, had been ruled by an iron-fisted monarchy for centuries. But Lissa's return had reignited a firestorm of ambition among the noble houses vying for power. They had to move quickly, or they'd be caught in the crossfire. Lissa and Nolan spent their days on the move, traveling between safe houses, hidden installations, and diplomatic enclaves across the galaxy. Nolan had been thrown into a world he didn't understand, a world of backroom deals and political maneuvering that made his previous smuggling and trading seem like child's play. He had learned quickly that Lissa wasn't just any princess, she was the key to the future of the Andorian Empire, and everyone from rival royal factions to criminal syndicates wanted her out of the way. One of their first stops had been a mining colony on the moon of Fathar 7, where Lissa had a secret ally, a former military commander named Talon, whose loyalty to her family had remained unwavering, even in the face of her kidnapping years ago. It was Talon who had arranged for the first step in their rebellion, securing a fleet of warships hidden in the Outer Rim. The only problem? Those ships were guarded by a mercenary army, and Talon wasn't sure how long his old connections would hold out. "How many mercs are we talking about here?" Nolan asked as he paced the cramped cabin of their shuttle, the stars streaking past outside. "Enough to make things complicated," Lissa replied, her violet eyes calculating, "but not enough to stop us." "You're being overly optimistic," Nolan muttered. He couldn't quite shake the sense that they were being set up for something big, something dangerous. But Lissa's confidence was infectious, and he had come to trust her. Even so, he wasn't about to let his guard down. "What's the plan, then?" Lissa stood tall, her gaze firm. "We split up. I'll draw their attention, create a diversion. While they're distracted, you and Talon will disable their defenses. It's simple." "Simple? Sounds like you're sending me in to do the dirty work while you play the hero." Nolan raised an eyebrow. A sly smile curved her lips. "Well, I've learned that sometimes it's better to let the hero be the one who distracts. You're better at getting things done quietly. I need you to be the one who strikes when it counts." "Great," Nolan muttered under his breath. "You know, you've got a real knack for making me feel expendable." Lissa gave him a knowing look, one that said she trusted him in ways he wasn't entirely sure he deserved. "You're not expendable, Nolan, you're essential." The assault on the mercenary stronghold on Fathar 7 went smoother than Nolan could have anticipated. They had calculated the timing perfectly. Lissa led a series of strikes against mercenary outposts to lure their forces away from the fleet's location, while the mercs scrambled to respond. Nolan, aided by Talon and a small team of elite operatives, infiltrated their command center and took control. The fleet was theirs. The mission was a success, and the tide of the rebellion had shifted in Lissa's favor. But Nolan could see it in her eyes, she was still playing a dangerous game. With each step, the risks grew, and he knew it wouldn't be long before the other factions moved against her. As they stood on the bridge of one of the commandeered warships, gazing out into the void of space, Lissa turned to Nolan. Her expression was unreadable, but the weight of her next words was clear. This is just the beginning, Nolan. We've won this battle, but there will be more. Our enemies will stop at nothing to crush us. Nolan crossed his arms, the weight of her words sinking in. I thought I was helping you stop a civil war. You're talking about a full-scale rebellion. It is a rebellion, Lissa said, her voice low but firm, one that will not only change the Andorian Empire, but the entire galaxy. Nolan stared at her, trying to reconcile the princess he had met months ago with the leader she had become. She was no longer the lost, vulnerable woman who had once been a slave. She was a queen in the making, driven by a cause far larger than herself. And what about me? Nolan asked, his voice quieter now. You have a place in this, Lissa replied, her tone softer than before. You're more than just a soldier, Nolan. You're a symbol. Humanity, our people, have always fought for survival against overwhelming odds. Now, you fight for something greater, for the future of the galaxy. Nolan looked out the viewport, watching the stars, each one a reminder of how small he had once felt in the vastness of space. But now, with Lissa at his side and a fleet under their command, he felt something stirring within him, a sense of purpose. They were no longer just pawns, they were the players. Months passed, and the rebellion grew in strength. They formed alliances with other oppressed systems, uniting disparate factions who had long been under the thumb of the Andorian Empire's oppressive regime. Nolan found himself at the heart of the conflict, leading covert missions, strategizing with Lissa, and even stepping onto the battlefield when necessary. But with each victory came greater challenges. The forces against them grew more desperate, resorting to underhanded tactics and brutal attacks. Assassins were sent after Lissa, spies infiltrated their ranks, and entire planets were devastated in the name of control. But with every blow, Lissa stood resolute, her eyes fixed on the horizon, and Nolan stood by her side, more than just her protector, but her equal. The final battle was fast approaching. The Andorian Empire's capital, the jewel of their civilization, awaited them. The throne room would be the site of the ultimate confrontation, a battle not just for control of the Empire, but for the fate of the galaxy itself. Nolan stood next to Lissa in the command center of their flagship, preparing for what could be their last mission. So this is it, he said quietly. Lissa nodded. This is it. I never thought I'd be part of something like this, Nolan admitted. When I first met you, I thought it was just another job. Now I don't think I'll ever be the same. Lissa placed a hand on his shoulder. You never were just a traitor, Nolan. You've always been more. You just needed the right cause to fight for. And with that, they made their final preparations, ready to face the storm that awaited them. The end, for now. Title: Human accepts an alien slave as payment, only to discover she's a wealthy princess. HFY, Sci-Fi, continued. The days after Aaron's defeat were chaotic. As expected, the Andorian Empire was built on a foundation of oppression and division. And now, with its ruling family fractured and the old order crumbling, the galaxy seemed poised on the brink of something new. Yet, despite the victory, Lissa and Nolan both knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The galaxy didn't change overnight. Lissa had defeated her brother, but she still had to convince the Andorian people and the other alien species that had been subjugated by the Empire that they were ready for a new world order. The challenge was more daunting than she had initially realized. Nolan could see it in her eyes as they stood in the war room of the rebel flagship, the Liberator. A few days after the final confrontation, her usual steely resolve was tempered with the weight of the decisions ahead. Where do we go from here? Nolan asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. He had been to enough battlefields to know that the real war often came after the shooting stopped. Lissa looked over the tactical displays, her fingers moving across the holographic console. We need to rebuild, but not just Andor, the entire Empire. I can't lead this alone, not when every corner of the galaxy has been so deeply scarred. I need allies, not just from within the Empire, but from outside of it too. Nolan nodded. knowing full well that a fractured galaxy could easily fall into chaos if no one stepped up to guide it. The people of Andor need to believe in something more than just a new throne. They need to see a future where they have a voice, where the old systems of control don't exist anymore. Exactly, Lissa agreed, her voice hardening. That's why I've asked for a council. A galactic council, made up of representatives from every planet, every system. We can't just rule by decree anymore. We need the cooperation of everyone if we're going to truly change things. Nolan took a deep breath, then let it out slowly. That sounds ambitious. But you've got something few people in this galaxy have, vision. That's why I'm here. Lissa, I've seen how much this means to you. But it's going to be a long road. It won't be easy, Lissa replied, her voice soft but resolute. But we don't have any other choice. If we fail, we go back to the old ways, and I refuse to let that happen. The first step in rebuilding came faster than expected. The various factions that had risen up against Aaron's tyranny had already begun to send emissaries and representatives. Once a fractured collection of rebel forces, they now needed to coalesce into something greater, a united front that could stand against the remnants of the old empire. One of Lissa's first meetings took place on the neutral world of Jorah 6. A bustling trade planet where beings from across the galaxy came together to barter, exchange, and discuss. It was here that Lissa, Nolan, and Talon would meet with several key leaders from the former Empire's outer colonies. These were not the royal houses that had clung to their power, but rather, the people who had suffered the most under the Empire's rule. "Are you ready?" Nolan asked, as they disembarked from their shuttle onto the planet's dusty surface. He had been with her long enough to know how much pressure Lissa was under. The future of everything she had fought for rested on the success of this meeting. Lissa glanced up at him, her expression calm but betraying the weight she carried. "I don't know if ready is the right word, but this has to work." "Then I'll back you, no matter what happens," Nolan said, giving her an encouraging nod. They walked through the crowded market square, flanked by Talon and their security detail. Jorah 6 was a melting pot of cultures, with beings of every shape, size, and color haggling for goods and passing information. Lissa's presence caused whispers to ripple through the crowd, and Nolan noticed the mix of awe and suspicion in the eyes of those who recognized her. The meeting hall was a grand structure, ancient yet modernized, designed to hold gatherings of interplanetary significance. Inside, representatives from dozens of different species awaited them. Some were wary, others eager, but all shared a common interest, the rebuilding of the galaxy. Lissa entered the hall with Nolan by her side. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation as she took her seat at the central table. The other leaders exchanged looks, sizing up the woman who had dethroned her brother and effectively ended the Andorian Empire's centuries-long rule over the galaxy. The first to speak was a tall, spindly alien from the planet Vortha. His skin was an iridescent blue, his features sharp and angular. He leaned forward, his eyes focused on Lissa. "Princess Lissa," he said, his voice smooth but wary, "you've claimed victory. But what will you do now? Your brother is dead. Your empire shattered. You stand before us as the last of the Andorian royal line. But you cannot expect to simply take control without consequences." "I don't want control," Lissa replied firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "I want peace. I want a galaxy where we no longer live in fear of oppressive regimes and power-hungry rulers. But that peace can only come through cooperation, not conquest." Another delegate, a broad-shouldered Roxian, spoke up. "And how do you intend to convince us to trust you?" "Princess, the Andorian Empire has dominated our worlds for millennia. You think we'll just forget the bloodshed, the suffering?" Lissa nodded solemnly. "I understand your distrust, but I cannot change the past, only the future. I ask for your trust, not as a ruler, but as someone who has known the pain of oppression, someone who has fought for something better. I will not ask you to follow me. I ask you to follow the vision we build together." Nolan watched as Lissa spoke, her words measured and filled with a quiet strength that made it clear she wasn't just a pawn in this game, she was a leader. But the room was still filled with uncertainty. The galaxy was full of factions, old alliances, and new power struggles. Trust would be earned, not given. As the debates raged on throughout the day, Nolan could feel the weight of history pressing down on them. The galaxy was at a crossroads, and the decisions made here would shape everything to come. He couldn't help but wonder how much Lissa truly understood the magnitude of her task. Weeks turned into months as Lissa continued her work, gathering support for the new council. It was slow and difficult, and at times, it felt like every step forward was met with 2 steps back. But through sheer will and determination, Lissa managed to unite enough of the galaxy's fragmented powers to form a tentative alliance, a fragile coalition built on mutual self-interest and a shared desire for change. Nolan, by her side through it all, had become more than just a protector or a soldier. He had become an advisor, a confidant, and through the long hours spent negotiating, planning, and strategizing, he found himself believing in this cause, not just for Lissa, but for something greater. He had seen what the old empire had done to the galaxy. He had seen the suffering, the injustice, the cruelty, but he had also seen what Lissa represented, a chance for a new order. Not one where rulers sat on thrones, but where everyone had a voice. A future where power didn't mean oppression, but opportunity for all. It was a vision worth fighting for. And in the quiet moments, when the weight of their mission felt almost unbearable, Nolan would look to Lissa and know that she was the one who would carry them through. This was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and its problems were many, but together, they would face whatever came next, because this time, they were no longer fighting just to survive.